Hey everybody, welcome back to the Combo Couch. So we have breaking news. Wisconsin is the only state to wage forward with their elections, even though we're having a pandemic. The city of Madison is asking a federal court to postpone the election and consider mail-in ballots. Now, unlike the majority of the states, Wisconsin refuses to postpone their election. The governor, Tony Evers, has decided that he wants to continue these primaries via absentee ballots. The problem is that they don't have enough people to count those absentee ballots to get those to the people who want them, etc. So that's also not going to work. And so the city of Madison is actually asking that the federal court postpone the election. Last Friday, Governor Evers asked for absentee ballots to be sent to all voters. Given the speed of COVID-19 spread within Madison, Dane County, and the state of Wisconsin at this time, we feel strongly asking voters to attend in-person voting as usual presents an unreasonable risk to individual voters, poll workers, and the general public. In addition, quote, polling places are inherently high contact settings, which involve many individuals coming into close contact and touching the same object over the course of the day. Due to these urgent concerns, the city of Madison filed a brief in federal court asking the court to postpone the election for at least 3 weeks. With all the evidence in front of me, I can only conclude that the best way and perhaps the only way is to vote by mail. And yet challenges remain. We need 1,500 poll workers to manage the voting process on April 7th. To date, more than 1,000 volunteer poll workers have canceled. In addition, we received cancellations from several polling locations. We're down to 66 polling locations from an original 92. Combining multiple wards into a single location is our only solution at this point, but this will create larger gatherings and challenge our social distancing goals. Right, because if you have many polling locations and then you decrease that, you're going to have more people in more polling locations. Not to mention the people that actually risk their life going. You also don't have the infrastructure like poll workers to handle the amount of people. You don't have the sanitation. You don't have anything ready to deal with this. And it's just going to end up with more people getting sick. They also point out how the absentee ballots are a good idea, but you also need to postpone the primaries till a later date because you're not going to be able to process all those absentee ballots in time. The logistics of managing an all absentee process require more time to put in place and further strain a clerk's office workforce that's already been under immense pressure and is beyond exhaustion. They've been processing as many ballots as they can. Because there are a lot less people working, they're not able to process them in time. Due to the COVID-19 epidemic and the resulting, quote, stay-at-home order of Wisconsin government Tony Evers, half of the city's poll workers are no longer working on the date of the spring election. Numerous polling locations are unavailable, raising the possibility that with less than 2 weeks to the election, polling locations, assuming they can be opened at all, will have to be combined. With this type of dislocation and more threatened as the date of the spring election nears, the city faces a very real possibility that half or more of the eligible voters who would normally go to the polls on election day will not be able to do so. This is not just morally unethical to force people to choose between voting and their health during a pandemic. It is also undemocratic because people want to vote, they just might not be able to. The numbers have increased so much since the last election we had. So it seems like many of the people in Madison, including the mayor and the city constituents across Wisconsin in general, don't want this to happen, but the governor doesn't seem to be communicating and actually listening to his constituents. Basically, what's happened is coronavirus has crashed the elections in Wisconsin. According to Politico, the state is facing a huge shortage in poll workers ahead of Tuesday's vote. This is going to create steep drops in turnout, obviously. That's obvious. It happened in Florida. It happened in Illinois. State officials are urging voters to request absentee ballots so they don't have to vote in person, but there isn't enough time or resources or the appetite among state legislators to just send out ballots or even ballot request forms to all voters. All of this is happening as Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat elected in 2018, has asked the federal government to issue a major disaster declaration for the entire state over coronavirus, but has stood firm along with other officials on holding the April 7th election as planned. The reality is we have a pandemic, we have a crisis right now, and not being on the same page is going to get people more sick. It's going to delay everything else because if we continue to have people exposing themselves, it's just going to push everything back and we really are running out of time. And if you didn't think it was bad enough that Tony Evers and a few other people in Wisconsin are pushing to continue this primary, and it seems highly suspect that they don't care about democracy. Tony Evers is also calling on the National Guard and previous reserves to work as poll workers, since most of them are not coming in. They should be doing other things. They should be doing other important things. The National Guard, right? Like, there are other COVID-related things they could be doing instead of being poll workers. It is anticipated that the assistance of the National Guard will not satisfy all the current staffing needs. Obviously, the National Guard is being stretched thin. There's no way they're going to be able to provide everything they need. This is Ron Rosenberry Chase. It is apparently not just Army National Guard. I am a former Air Force Reserve officer, and this afternoon I received orders reactivating my commission and ordering me to assist. So, if you weren't an active member, but you were still part of the Army, you have now been reactivated, and they want you to be a poll worker. They want the National Guard to be poll workers, when there are so many other things these people could be doing that are, of course, related to the pandemic. And it gets worse because Wisconsin State is asking the healthcare workers to become poll workers. That's right. Your doctors, your nurses, your essential workers, please go make them poll workers. The Wisconsin Department of Health Services said, citizen involvement is essential to our election process, and with the potential spread of COVID-19, we anticipate many veteran poll workers who faithfully serve every election day may not serve this year due to their age and high risk to COVID-19 exposure. With as many as 30,000 poll workers needed to support an election, many Wisconsin cities, towns, and villages are looking for volunteers to assist with the April 7, 2020 election. Governor Evers is asking our private, nonprofit, and public sector partners to please consider helping their local government election process during the COVID-19 health emergency by encouraging their employees and members who were able and who are not at high risk themselves to participate in this election. First of all, everybody's at high risk. Everybody. Because we don't know what makes there's 17-year-olds dying from this. So there's a lot of people in their 20s that are being affected. It's not just about age. Obviously, older people are more susceptible to the serious aspects of this disease, but that doesn't mean that younger people aren't. And we've shown that. We've shown that there was a miscalculation. It's just not fair to put all those people at risk. Further, we need our doctors and nurses are already spent on participating every day and helping and saving lives. Now you want to make them be poll workers? This is disgusting. It's so bad. There's no way. There's no way this is like democratic. There's no way you can rationalize this. It's just, it shouldn't even be legal. They're actually even going after restaurant workers too. They're getting things in the mail asking them to be poll workers. It's like, why? Because they've been exposed already. So I guess it doesn't matter if they get exposed. But all the people coming in to vote, it's not logical. They're going to provide you with training prior to election day. What training? Election day is Tuesday. What kind of training are they going to get? This is still an ongoing, unprecedented crisis, and we don't deal with it by putting more people at risk. Having the audacity to ask people to pretty much volunteer their life for to vote when people might not even show up because they're scared, when other people who were supposed to show up aren't going to show up because they're scared, is stupid. It is voter suppression. It is undemocratic. It's really sad that America is doing this right now, and we should all be up in arms. We should all be upset about this. This is our country. This is our constitution. If you're a constitutionalist, how are you going to be okay with this? Like, it doesn't matter what party you feel you belong to, if any at all. This should not be happening right now. It gets worse because we talked about how Madison has also reduced its polling locations. Well, Milwaukee has cut it down from 180 to 10. That is crazy. So the city of Milwaukee is expected to only have 10 to 12 voting sites, even fewer, open for in-person voting citywide during its April 7th election day. And that's a dramatic reduction from the 180 sites that are typically open on an election day. And I assure you, they're down to even less than that because people aren't going to risk themselves when they see people dying left and right. We're completely not counting every single person that's sick because there are not enough tests. So therefore, every single person that's sick doesn't get a test. So you can bet those numbers are about 10 to 20 times higher. The death rates keep going up. How dare you? How dare you? Because now it's not March 3rd. Now it's April. And you're going to have your primary April 7th. And the numbers have drastically gone up with the amount of infected people. It is obviously absolutely contradicting. You're telling people to shelter in place, but you're also telling them to go vote. Which is it? You can't have both. So Governor Tony Evers said, our top priority is the health and safety of Wisconsinites. I'm sorry. That is not your top priority, clearly. Our safer at home order is a critical step in doing that. So thank you for staying home and keeping Wisconsin safe. How do you expect people to flatten the curve and stay at home when they have to vote? So either they're going to vote or they're going to stay at home. They can't do both. You need to extend the primaries by postponing them and making sure people have the time to do what they need to do. And safety is clearly not a top concern. What it seems to be is that a top concern is voter suppression. And it is worthy to remind people that Wisconsin is a state Bernie won with flying colors when he ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016. And of course, the Democratic electorate is really keen on stopping him from doing anything. In contradiction to what the governor said, a physician in Wisconsin said otherwise. I am an internal medicine physician in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm calling on Governor Evers and other decision makers to #postpone the election scheduled on April 7th.
On March 24th, when Governor Evers ordered the state to shelter in place, there were 506 cases and 5 deaths from the COVID-19 virus pandemic. Today, there are over 1,300 cases and there have been 16 deaths, more than double the cases and 3 times the deaths in a short amount of time. Governor Evers, you ordered the people of Wisconsin to shelter in place to slow down the spread of COVID-19, and that was the right call. However, keeping the election scheduled on April 7th is a reckless and irresponsible decision and could lead to people needlessly suffering. It also goes against your own order and the CDC's guidelines to limit social interactions during these next 6 to 8 weeks in order to flatten the curve.
And guess what? We're further along now. And this is like we're almost at the point where we're going to hit our peak, like in a couple weeks, 3 weeks or so. So how is it logical, even if you don't care about people? Like, it's just not logical. It makes you look inept. It makes you look like a terrible leader.
We saw significant problems ensue in both Illinois and Florida when they chose to proceed with their elections, including poll workers contracting COVID-19 who may have inadvertently infected numerous voters that went to the polls that day. The other issue is democracy. A large number of people will be unable to vote because of the unrealistic deadlines that we're upholding right now. The workaround that you've proposed of providing absentee ballots to all voters is not feasible for multiple reasons, with the city of Madison already saying they're not going to be able to comply with all their requests because of the massive increase. The other issue is that absentee ballots require witnesses, which goes against the logic of your shelter-in-order placing people who've likely been more mobile during the shelter-in-place order with people who are more isolated, older, and probably at higher risk of complications.
Again, if you don't have enough people doing absentee ballots, how do you expect to tell people to vote by absentee ballot? You want people to stay completely away from other people. But at the same time, they need people around them to make this happen. How do you combine those two? You can't, right?
I believe this to be an unacceptable risk, and it appears the city of Madison, who filed a federal brief yesterday, agrees with that as well. There's no legitimate reason why our election day should not be postponed. 14 other states have already done so, including Ohio, New York, Georgia, Indiana, and Delaware. As a physician and concerned citizen, I'm asking our leaders to make the right call and to postpone the election. People should not have to choose between their right to vote, which is essential to our democracy, and our public health, which is endangered by this pandemic. Lives are at stake.
Exactly. How dare you put the American public and your constituents who voted you into office between a rock and a sword, because you're telling them that they should go out to vote and exercise their right to democracy, but you're also telling them to shelter in place, and you're also telling them to help during the election, but you're also telling them to be careful. You can't rationalize both. I'm like appalled that this is happening. I feel like people don't realize how bad this is, like how bad it looks. I know we've been thrown breadcrumbs with the latest stimulus bill. We've been mistreated. It's just been really bad. But this just takes the icing on the cake to have an election, a primary that could easily be postponed, to force people to have it. It's just obvious right now what they're doing. They're obviously trying to suppress the vote, and this is exactly how they do it. And they don't care how many people they endanger and all the things they have to do. They don't care as long as they get their way. So National Guard should be helping with getting Americans tested and treated for COVID-19, not acting as poll workers for an election that you can easily postpone. Do the right thing for the people of Wisconsin and postpone the election. Absolutely. I mean, we shouldn't have poll workers right now. What we should have is vote by mail. Even neoliberals are actually supporting vote by mail efforts.
Look at us today. Where we are today, you will be. We are your future.
You don't make the timeline. The virus makes the timeline. coronavirus should not stop citizens from casting their ballots.
There is a safe way to vote, and that is to vote by mail.
We got $400 million for elections. We need much more so that we can have more vote by mail.
I think Democrats have to demand that vote by mail is in the next stimulus bill and make that a condition of supporting the bill.
Making it easier for people to vote from home.
At the state level, voters should be pushing for their state legislatures and their governors to do this.
It has to actually start happening right now.
I would not advise someone I love to go sit in a polling place for 10, 12 hours and come into contact with hundreds of people.
In the middle of the pandemic, American voters are not going to be forced between their health or voting.
Now, the only issue I have with vote by mail is I want more oversight. I want our people to be able to view how this process goes about, who gets them, who's counting the ballots, etc. And that's something that we have to strive for. But I definitely support vote by mail compared to getting people out there in the polls. We don't know how long this pandemic's going to last, so we really don't know. Even if we postpone it till June or July, we really don't know how people are going to be able to vote. So I think the best course of action is to make sure everybody gets a vote by mail. This throws everything off so much because people thought, oh yeah, like that's it, Joe Biden won. But at the same time, because of this pandemic and because of the leadership Bernie Sanders has been showing, it really makes it possible for people to be like, hey, we need somebody else. And the reality is, I think they're scared of that. And I think there's also suppression going on. And we have to be mindful of our elections. I mean, a lot of people don't pay attention because it's not a sexy subject, but we really should all be talking about this. It's completely disgusting that we're forcing people to vote during this primary. They're totally, using the coronavirus to manipulate things to their way, whether it's the Patriot Act, whether it's our elections, whether it's giving money to corporations. They are using this disease for disaster capitalism, and it's disgusting. And we all need to be talking about the integrity in our elections. It is by far what has defined this election, has been a complete facade of an election. It has been complete bullshit that has happened in terms of the integrity of our elections. There is no integrity. We have horrible elections. Venezuela has much better elections, and we are constantly saying that we need to invade them because they don't. Nobody's really talking about these things, and we need to continue talking about them. Spread the message. This is your country, your democracy, your life. What happens after this election is going to affect this country and the world for years to come. If we don't get somebody like an FDR in office, we will pretty much not be able to bring the economy back. We've seen what the stimulus bill is. It's basically money for corporations flat out. It's just an insult. And if we get somebody like Joe Biden or Donald Trump, it's going to be a disaster. We need actual change, and our elections is where that begins.